The check was sitting on the kitchen table when I walked in, and the number on it made my stomach drop. Not because it was small, because it was exactly the amount my brother owed. In my line of work, that kind of coincidence doesn't exist. I'm a licensed insolvency trustee at a mid-size firm in Ottawa, and I've spent 6 years watching people do desperate, creative, and occasionally criminal things with other people's money. I know what financial manipulation looks like before most people even realize it's happening. So when I saw that check made out to me, signed by my grandmother, for $380,000 sitting in the middle of my parents' kitchen table, with my mother standing over it like a guard dog, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I pulled out the chair across from her, sat down, and said, "Tell me what's going on." Because that's what you do when you find a discrepancy. You don't react, you investigate. My name is Rachel, and I turned 32 last March. I've been working since I was 15. Put myself through Carleton on OSAP and part-time bookkeeping jobs, and built a career that I'm genuinely proud of. I am not, by any measure, a dramatic person. I don't air grievances at Christmas dinner. I don't post about my family online. I handle things quietly, methodically, and with documentation, which is why what happened over the following 72 hours was, in some ways, the most professionally useful experience of my life. And in every other way, the most painful thing I've ever survived. Let me back up. My grandmother, my father's mother, is 81 years old and sharp as a tack. She lives in a condo in Westboro, still does the Globe and Mail crossword every morning, still argues with the news. She and I have always been close in a way that skipped a generation. My father has never really understood her, and she's never quite forgiven him for it. We used to have lunch every few weeks before the pandemic, and even after, we kept up the habit. She knew my job, my apartment, my ambitions. She knew things about my life that I'd never told my parents. What I didn't know, not until the afternoon of my birthday, was that she'd been planning something for years. She called me that morning and asked me to come by her condo after work. She said she had a gift. I assumed she meant the cardigan she'd been knitting since November. I brought wine. She sat me down at her small dining table, the one with the lace cloth she brought from Portugal 40 years ago, and slid an envelope across to me. Inside was a check for $380,000 and a one-page letter. The letter explained that she had sold a rental property she'd owned in Canada since the 90s, a property none of us knew she still had, and that after capital gains and legal fees, this was my share. She had, she wrote, given my father a portion when he'd had financial trouble a decade ago. This was to make things equal. She wanted me to have it while she was alive, while she could see what I did with it. She wanted me to use it for something real. A home, a business, a future. I sat there for a long time. Then I hugged her until she laughed and told me I was wrinkling her blouse. I should have gone straight home. I know that now. But my parents had called earlier to say they were doing a small birthday dinner. My mother had made her roast chicken. My brother was coming, and I thought, it's one dinner, 2 hours. I can keep this to myself for one evening. I didn't account for my grandmother calling my father on my way over. She told me later she thought she was doing a kind thing, giving him a chance to be happy for me. She has always, in her heart, wanted her son to be better than he is. That hope has cost both of us. By the time I arrived at my parents' house in Barhaven, the envelope was out of my bag. I still don't know exactly how it happened. My coat went on the hook by the door, my bag on the bench, and somewhere between the hallway and the kitchen, my mother had opened it. She was standing at the table, the check in her hand, when I walked in. My father was behind her. My brother, Darren, was leaning in the doorway to the living room with his arms crossed, not quite able to look at me. The number on that check was $380,000. The number Darren owed his former business partner, the one who'd been leaving increasingly unfriendly messages on my parents' landline for 3 months, was $360,000. "We need to talk," my mother said. She put the check down on the table and smoothed it flat with her palm, the way you'd present a document at a closing. And something inside me, the part that had been a daughter, that had driven out here in the dark for roast chicken, that had wanted, just for one evening, to feel celebrated, went very quiet. "Sit down, Rachel." I sat. She began talking, and as she talked, I listened the way I listen to clients who are in denial about their liabilities, patiently, completely, without interrupting. The story was this. Darren had invested in a renovation business with a man named Gary 3 years ago. It had gone badly. There were contracts with clauses Darren hadn't read, draws he'd approved without proper oversight, a line of credit he'd personally guaranteed. When the business collapsed, Gary had gone to a collections attorney. The attorney had sent letters. My parents, who had co-signed one of the earlier loans, were now exposed. This was the first I was hearing of any of it. 360, my mother said. That's what it takes to make this go away. You have 380. Rachel, this is your family. I looked at my brother. How long have you known about this? A while, he said. He still wasn't looking at me. How long is a while, Darren? 18 months, maybe. 18 months. I had sat across from him at Thanksgiving and Christmas and 2 different birthday dinners over the past 18 months. And not once had he mentioned that our parents were potentially on the hook for his failed business. I need some water, I said. My mother got up to get it, and in those 30 seconds I did a very quick, very private inventory of my options. I could refuse outright. They'd push back. They'd escalate. I could agree and lose everything. Or I could buy time. Let me understand the full picture, I said when she came back. Before I make any decisions, I need to see the paperwork. The original loan agreement, the personal guarantee, the demand letters from the attorney, everything. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at Darren. Rachel, my mother said carefully, we don't really have time for. Then we have a problem, I said, because I'm not signing anything without documentation. That's not negotiable. I work in finance. You know that. I won't move a dollar without a paper trail. It was the truest thing I said all evening. And it bought me exactly what I needed. They gave me the weekend. I went home, poured a very large glass of Malbec, and sat at my kitchen table until almost midnight going through every scenario I could think of. Here is what I knew professionally. My grandmother's gift was legally hers to give. The check was made out to me. Under Canadian gift law, it was my asset the moment it was signed. There was no legal obligation, none for me to use it for my brother's debt. My parents' exposure on the co-signed loan was real, but it was also their own doing, from a decision they'd made without consulting me. Here's what I knew personally. If I handed over that check, it would be gone. Not just the money, the choice, the future my grandmother had wanted for me. And there would not be another $380,000. Not from her, not from anywhere. Here is what I knew about my family. They would not accept a quiet refusal. There would be escalation. There would be threats. My mother, when she believes she is right, is immovable and occasionally vicious. My father defaults to silence, and then sudden, unpredictable anger. And Darren, who has spent 35 years being rescued from the consequences of his own decisions, would not understand why this time was different. I called my grandmother on Saturday morning. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I was afraid of something like this. Did you know about Darren's situation? I knew he'd had business trouble. I didn't know the number. A pause. Rachel, that money is yours. Do you understand me? Whatever they say to you, that money is yours. I know, I said. I just need a few days to make sure it stays that way. She asked if I needed help. I told her I needed one thing. I needed her to not speak to my father again until I told her it was okay. She agreed without hesitation. That, more than anything, told me she understood exactly what was happening. I spent Saturday on the phone with a real estate lawyer I know from referrals. I'd never needed a personal consultation before, but she owed me a favor from a file I'd helped her untangle 2 years ago, and she gave me 2 hours of her Saturday afternoon without billing me. We talked through the check, the gift, the tax implications, and most importantly, what I could do to protect it before my parents could maneuver around me. Under the Income Tax Act, gifts from family members in Canada are generally not taxable to the recipient, but there were still steps to take, accounts to open, documentation to establish. By Sunday evening, the check had been deposited into a new account at a different institution than the one my parents knew about. I had a paper trail. I had a time-stamped record of every step. And I had a plan. Monday evening, I drove back to Barhaven. My mother had made soup, which meant she was in a conciliatory mood and thought the evening would go her way. My father was in his chair in the living room. Darren was at the kitchen table, and he had brought Gary's attorney's demand letter, the original loan documents, and a yellow legal pad with numbers written on it, which I found almost touchingly optimistic. I sat down, accepted the soup, and let my mother talk for about 15 minutes. Her argument had evolved over the weekend. It was no longer just about the money. It was about family loyalty, about what it means to have people who show up for you, about how she had sacrificed, how my father had sacrificed, how none of us would be where we were without the foundation they'd built. She used the word sacrifice 4 times. She used the word family 11. I counted. When she finished, I asked to see the loan documents. Darren pushed them across the table. I read them slowly, which made everyone uncomfortable. Which was the point. The personal guarantee was real. My parents' exposure was real. The demand from Gary's attorney was real. Okay, I said. I have some questions. The first question was for Darren. Had he sought independent legal advice before signing the original agreement? He hadn't. Had he disclosed the personal guarantee to my parents before asking them to co-sign? He looked at the table. The second question was for my mother. Did she understand, at the time of co-signing, the full extent of the liability she was taking on? She said of course, she had. I asked if she'd had a lawyer review it. She said they trusted Darren. The third question I asked the room generally. Did any of them understand that a demand letter from a collections attorney is the beginning of a negotiation, not the end of one? Silence. Gary's attorney sent this letter 6 weeks ago, I said. They haven't filed yet, which means there's room to negotiate, which means $360,000 is not necessarily the number. My mother leaned forward. Rachel, I'm not finished, I said it quietly. In my experience, quiet is more alarming than loud. Here is what I'm willing to do. I will refer you to a debt restructuring consultant I trust. I will help you draft a counterproposal to Gary's attorney. I will help you understand what your actual exposure is and what your realistic options are. I will do all of that for free, because you are my family. I paused. What I will not do is sign over my grandmother's gift to cover a liability you took on without telling me. For a business decision my brother made without consulting anyone, with money that is legally and completely mine. The room was very still. Then my mother said, if you don't help your brother, we will tell your grandmother what kind of person you've become. I looked at her. What kind of person is that? Someone who turns her back on her family when they need her. My father made a small sound that might have been agreement. I put my spoon down beside the soup bowl. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. I want you to think carefully, I said, before you call Grandma. Because I've already spoken to her. And because if this becomes a legal matter, which it will, if you pursue what you're implying, I will need to account for every dollar she's ever given this household. Including the $50,000 she gave you and Dad 8 years ago, that I only found out about last year. My mother's face changed. That gift was not reported correctly, I said. I'm not certain, but I'm fairly confident a forensic review of the family's financial history would be interesting for everyone involved. I say this not as a threat. I say it as a professional assessment of the risk you'd be taking. Darren stood up. Rachel, you can't. I can. I won't, if this ends tonight. I pulled on my jacket. Call the consultant I'm sending you. Let the professionals handle Gary's attorney, and let me use my grandmother's gift. The way she intended. I walked out. I sat in my car for a long time before I started it. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. The drive home on the 416 was dark and quiet, and I listened to the radio and thought about nothing in particular. 3 days later, my mother called. She did not apologize. That was never going to happen. But she said they had spoken to the consultant, and that the consultant had confirmed what I'd said, that there was room to negotiate, that the number was not fixed, that there were options they hadn't considered. She said it in the tone of someone reporting bad weather, matter of fact, slightly aggrieved. Good, I said. We're not happy with you, Rachel. I know. Your brother is. Mum. I said it gently, which I think was harder for her than if I'd been angry. Darren is 35. He has been making expensive mistakes his entire adult life, and someone has always covered them. I'm not able to be that person. I'm not willing to be. That's not cruelty. That's just the truth. She hung up. My grandmother called me that evening. She had heard from my father a short, stiff call that she described as him trying to guilt her into pressuring me, and her telling him in clear terms that the money was mine and the conversation was over. He didn't take it well, she said, with what I'm fairly certain was satisfaction. Are you okay? I asked. Rachel, she said. I am 81 years old. I have been managing your father's feelings since he was born. I am perfectly fine. She asked what I was going to do with the money. I told her I'd been looking at a 2-bedroom unit in a co-ownership building near Hintonburg, a neighborhood I'd wanted to live in for years, close to work, close to the parkway. I told her I was also looking at registering my own practice, something I'd been putting off because the startup costs had always seemed too large. She was quiet for a moment. Do both, she said. The unit closed in June. I moved in on a Saturday in July with help from 2 friends and an elevator that kept stopping on the 3rd floor. My grandmother came to see it the following week. She sat in my living room with a cup of tea and looked out the window at the street below, and she said it reminded her of a place she'd lived when she first came to Canada. I didn't ask her what she meant by that. I just sat next to her and drank my tea. The practice registration is still in process. These things take time, and I'm doing it correctly, which means doing it slowly. But the account is funded, the business plan is written, and I have 2 potential clients already waiting. Darren's situation was eventually settled for $210,000 after a negotiated restructuring. My parents refinanced a portion of their home equity to cover it. It was painful for them. And I'm not glad it was painful. But it was theirs to handle, and they handled it. I did not contribute $1. My relationship with my parents is what I'd describe as cordial and distant, which is an improvement over what it was. We see each other at major holidays. The conversations are careful. I think my mother understands. on some level, that I drew a line she couldn't cross, and that the line was reasonable. I don't know if she'll ever say that out loud. I've stopped needing her to. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing I think about when I'm sitting in my own living room, in my own building, in the neighborhood I chose for myself, is what my grandmother said in that letter. She wrote that she wanted to see what I did with it while she was still here, while she could still witness it. I think about that a lot. The idea that someone who loves you wants to watch you build something. Not after you've built it. During. I hope I'm giving her something worth watching.